Hey there, today I'm going to have a look at this knife. This is a sort of a mid-tech, I would guess you would describe it, knife by a South African maker called Andre de Villiers. It's called his Butcher. This is his classic Butcher, and it's from 2016. This knife was lent to me by Ben, who I've known through some forums online. Thank you very much, Ben. And I've put it to a bit of light use, and have sort of made some conclusions about said classic Butcher. So, by mid-tech I mean this is kind of a limited production run. I would assume that, and this is just me assuming, that a lot of the work is done by hand, but then sort of some of the more major work is done by CNC machines, water jets, and whatnot. So, but very much a sort of customizable style knife, lots of different finishes and such available, and definitely a sort of high level of competition, or at least price to be able to buy into getting one of these things. I'd put it at about the to get one to Australia, probably about the $600 to $700 mark. So just some basics. You get a titanium frame lock flipper with a S35 VN Wharncliffe blade with a quite dramatic fuller cut through there just to reduce the weight, and then it also has a top swedge just there as well. So it's a flipper knife, and it is on a bearing style system that is, I'll have to refer to what he's calling it, but it's different to a lot of other bearings. It's sort of made to be a bit more robust and a bit more grit proof than, say, something like your IKBS and things like that. And it does flick very, very well. It's got a big heavy blade, which does help. When you do flip it, you can sort of feel, it's like almost a gearish feeling as you go through the motion. So there's a couple of really minuscule clicks, like as you roll it through, and it probably is just that action that is probably an intentional thing, but it's different. It still deploys pretty much every time, unless you're really sort of even when you're really like it's going to come open because of that big heavy blade. So the action's really, really good. It's just different, I guess, is the best term for it. So let's look at it compared to some other knives. Let's put it at the top here. Let's look at it next to a Spyderco Paramilitary 2. So it's a pretty big knife. It's it's big, and it's stocky as well. So the PM2 from the top there. The blade is probably about as thick all the way along the blade as the PM2 is just right at the top of the blade. And the handle is about the same thickness, but it just feels a little bit more robust just due to the sort of squareness of it as well, I guess, as well. All that sort of business. All right, so that's first a PM2. Let's look against a Benchmade 940. There we go. Again, I think probably lots of knife guys at least have held a 940. Let's look at it against another Lent knife, a large Sebenza. Go. A large Sebenza is about a Paramilitary 2 size knife again, and let's look at it against the world's most opposite knife to this, the Almar Eagle, Falcon. One day I'll call it the Falcon first time, I promise. It's a very light, thin little folder. And lastly, let's look at it next to a CRKT Squid. There we go. So it is a big, stocky folding knife. Let's get a rough weight on it. $221 grams. So compared to, say, the Paramilitary's 108 grams, it's a knife about the same size, roughly, but about twice the weight. So what are these sorts of knives for? Well, these knives are purely, in my opinion, for the enjoyment of carrying these sorts of knives. Despite it being quite large and thick and murdery looking, I think he's made a really good choice. I'm not sure if it was Ben that chose it, or if it's just the way the knife always comes, by having a geez, they're still pointy at the tips, by having a sheep's foot style, Wharncliffe tipless, so somewhat, in terms of having a spear-shaped tip blade. I think it's a really good compromise that does kind of knock it down a bit to feeling a bit more like just a really overbuilt, proper utility knife. And utility is something that straight-edged blades like this really, really do well in. So just for testing, I cut up some cardboard and I cut up some fruit and just carried it for a day or so in my pocket. And yeah, I've I don't hate it. It's definitely a taste thing. It's definitely something that you're either going to like knives like this or you're not. Myself personally, I could see myself perhaps just having one for my just general collection. Just so when I line all my knives up, I've got something crazy all the way down to something ultralight and then all the different knives in between, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it's definitely something that you're either going to know by looking at that you like and go ahead and get it. In terms of fit and finish, it's really well done. This has been a used knife, so it's probably, I can't really tell you how it comes straight from the factory, but it came to me with a working edge. I've just touched it up because I've used a little bit, and completely fine. It's, yeah, just completely symmetrical in terms of its swedges and things like that. There's no, they're both the same height along the blade. The grind's done really, really well. The flat is pretty much dead 90 degrees. As in when you rest it against the table, which is hard to do with a flipper, but there's one thing about flipping Wharncliffe knives, it is hard to use them for their full capacity because you will get a bit of a bit of air under there in this part here. But if you do put it against a desk, which I'll show in my sort of apple chopping montage, you do get the full blade to surface contact, and it does make it for a really good sort of chopping or even food prep knife. Now this is a very thick blade, so it does have that tendency to wedge the food apart a bit rather than slice it, but when you slow your motions down, that straight edge in S35 VN will do any sort of slicing task I think you'd ever need it to as well. It's got a pretty nice high, it is pretty much a flat rather than a hollow, but it's a high enough flat to still be, fairly decent at slicing when compared to something like, even this Benchmade here, which has a much lower flat, so it's, perhaps not as good. Anyway, in terms of utility, you're going to make some, you're going to have some sacrifices for carrying a knife such as this, because it's not, it's not a Delica, it's not a paramilitary or something that is just a pure great slicing knife. You give yourself a few more eccentricities to have something that's cool, but also something that is, in my opinion, actually fairly practical. The handle is quite comfortable. It feels lighter than it would look as well in the hand. It's a funny knife because you look at it and you prepare for it to be like a big stainless steel brick of a thing, but it's actually not. It's not light, of course. It's twice as much as a PM2, but in terms of actually carrying the thing, it's pleasantly surprising in your hand, and it is a really well balanced knife. The balance point's sort of just where my index finger is there, so it's probably just mainly due to the titanium and the sparing use of metal really down this side. This is just a really light either aluminium or titanium backspacer there, and there's not really much of it. So he's done a really good job of keeping it balanced and really keeping it surprisingly agile in hand for something so, cleaverish, chopperish, Really, really cool. The details that I love these little sort of separately anodized or finished portions of the blade here, just really good for general interest. The inside of the lock there is done really well. The lockup is fine. It's got pretty early, about 20% of the way across the tang, and yeah, there's no stick or anything like that. It's just really well executed. Definitely something that's been, when you get a knife that passes through the maker's hands, and every example that you'd ever get, it's obviously stuff that a real human would test and make sure is dialed in just perfectly, and there is absolutely no play whatsoever in this knife. There's no up and down, just a little bit of side to side. I would say that's to do with probably the bearing system though, and it's not an unstable feeling, it's just a bit like our Benchmades. You're not worried about them flying out of the handles, but to get the action, I guess, with this type of knife, this is the Benchmade, to get the axis lock action, you just have a tiny little bit of play, and this one has got the same. It's just, it's hard to see because it's like that optical illusion where you wiggle something around, but there is just a little tiny bit, just enough you can feel, but not really even enough you can see. So it's fine in my opinion, absolutely fine. So this knife here, to get a knife of this style, you could probably pay about as much and get a knife of this style. So that really is the choice, and really is how the market is at the moment. So a mid-tech that is a bit different and jazzy, a bit niche perhaps, about as the same price as sort of a very standard working knife that is, expertly and impeccably put together. So actually same materials in both of these too. So It really is a, it's priced quite fairly, I think, when compared to what just a basic production factory knife, albeit one of the best ones, is going for. So yeah, it's going to be up to your taste and whether this is something for you. In terms of faults on the blade or with the design, there's no faults that I can pick with how it's constructed. The action does not bother me at all, that you can feel some sort of mechanical gear action in there. What does bother me a little bit is the type of jimping he's put inside, just near the flipper tab there, that you will rub your finger along when you engage that flipper. It's a little bit chafy. And I'm not really sure the purpose of it, because there's some really good jimping at the back of the blade here. And yeah, you can lock your thumb in there for sure, but you'd probably be just as, unless you've got smaller hands and you can't reach that, you're probably going to be just, locking your hands in there and not there. So it is a bit, if I zoom in, you see it's got quite a, that's grabby. That is a little bit grabby. So it's just something I'd probably rather it did without. If I was to order one, I'd probably ask him to, if he just minded perhaps polishing those out and just having them as flats there, which would be fine for me entirely. So yeah, just a bit of a closer up look at the handle as well. It's nice and normally put together with Torx screws. Nothing, often mid-techs fall into the trap of having their own hardware and their own sort of business like that. Yeah, so it's all just Torx accessible. The pocket clip's interesting. It's very much a type of custom knife pocket clip, as in dare to be different kind of thing. And it carries about as well as you'd expect a knife of this size to carry. It's actually fairly deep. Like you just have this tiny bit of the knife sticking out here, which on a huge knife like this is actually fine in my opinion. So not too bad at all. I'll just show some pictures of it in the pocket too. So overall, I mean, is it my ideal style of knife? Well, it isn't. I love the Wharncliffe. I'd probably dial back the size a little bit, just to perhaps 3.5 inches. I'd probably knock about that much off the blade, have about that much. Yeah, and the handle, ideally a little bit thinner. It's pretty wide across it, but for someone with larger hands, it's actually still a fairly reasonable fit for me too. So yeah. The Andre de Villiers, very cool. I would never have experimented with this sort of knife at all had it not been sent to me for review. So very, very cool of you there, Ben. Thank you very much. I had one more thing I felt I needed to say. Yes, it is this finish on the titanium here, a real fingerprint magnet. It's almost got like a glossy clear coat over it, which and as it does with the blade too. Very, very I've run this through some cardboard, and I've run this through some like sticky tape and some apple as well, and it does mark a lot, so you'll be eternally polishing this down. This knife, I wouldn't say is for a safe, clean usage. I would say it is for quite rough, ready, rugged usage. He's gone to the trouble of putting good sort of resistant bearings in there. It's a thick, stocky knife with good ergonomics and a nice strong frame. Like, I'd say it's definitely a using knife, so it is just a little bit, I'd prefer having more using textures on my knife, so not as mirrory and not as, fingerprinty. Just so when you do use the knife, it gets a bit more like this Sebenza with a nice sort of subdued finishes, so that it doesn't really show up the wear and tear. This is a 7-month, I think, used Sebenza, and it still looks just fantastic. So I'd probably prefer textures like this than textures like this. But that's about all. That's really about all I'd knock it for. And I think it's a really well executed knife for what it is. If it is your style of knife, I would happily suggest that you go ahead and pull this trigger and get yourself something really interesting, unusual, and really quite usable. Thanks very much for watching, dudes. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.